T as in Tao.
Coming to you live from a bathhouse in Greece, it's the TaoEternal. What's up, players? Pimps? Casual gamers? I think it's time to start out a new little series. We got your new game here, Castle Burn. Looks pretty sweet. It's kind of like Clash Royale that I didn't play. But it's really styled more like a real-time strategy. So it kind of looks like Clash Royale, and if you did play that and you're burnt out on it, I would still try this. Because mechanically, there's some dynamics in it which make it really interesting. I think it's different, but it has that kind of feel similar to something like Rival, where Rival was way more interesting, in my opinion, than Clash Royale, because you could do different things with the game mechanics. So, like we've done before, we'll start with just looking at some top gameplay. Right now, your boy's at Silver 2, 694. It's not bad. I've only been playing for about 2 days, so nothing too special. But there's always a ladder to climb. And look at this, just like I like. We got recommended replays. We got them in every league. It's awesome. Do we want to start with the pros? No. Let's start with the newbiest, scrubbiest, scrubdiddlyunchuses that we can find. And we'll just quickly talk about the mechanic of the game. Let's jump in. Alright. This is beautiful. It's got pause functions, it's got speed ups already. That's great. Took Rival months to get that shit. Alright, so we got Isaac, we got Gui Sozaluz. Yeah. So here's your game board, map, whatever you like. You play heads up, PvP, although there are PvE options within the game, different little story modes and stuff. But the main draw for the game, I suspect, is going to be the competitive function of PvP. So you start with a castle. You are going to, during the course of the game, should you stay alive, have the option to select 6 cards that you can use once unlocked to play the units represented on the cards on the game board. There is a currency in the game, which is mana, and as you can see scattered throughout the board with little magical blue fairy dust sparkling out the tops of them, there are mana wells called mana sanctums. In order to harvest the sanctums, you need to build the mana sanctum building. And there is also a population limit function in the game called capacity, and you need to build camps in order to add an additional 10 capacity. I believe you start with 10, and you can have a maximum of 100. All units in the game, with the exception of your heroes, which we'll talk about in just a sec, once being played, consume some of your total capacity, just like in Warcraft or Starcraft, any of the crafts. And then based on the relative strength of the unit, it will consume more or less of that. Cards are broken up into tiers, and upon unlocking any 2 tier 1 cards, your castle will begin an upgrade cycle heading to tier 2, which allows for the unlocking of tier 2 cards and also provides a health buff, a damage buff for the castle, and health buffs for all your buildings. Also, health buffs for your hero. That one's important. Following tier 2, unlocking 2 more cards, which could be from either tier 1 or 2. You unlock tier 3, which gives you access to the most valuable, most rare, highest damaging cards in the game. Since this isn't a real-time strategy environment, things happen really quick. A lot of the strategy of the game is trying to read what your opponent is doing and outplay them. Putting effective counters on the board. Once you put something on the board, you cannot micromanage to control it, except with the return function, which is something really novel about the game. Bottom right hand corner, you'll see a shield with a little red squiggly arrow. And once that's active, all of your units on the field of play, if you hit that return button, they will all start to return to the castle. If you allow them to return to the castle, they'll be refunded for 2/3 of their value. Or you can hit the button again after a certain delay, and they will re-engage and move towards the enemy's castle. After you re-engage, there is a cooldown to return again, so that's something to manage. You don't want to play it too soon or too late. And finally, you do have a hero. A hero doesn't count against your capacity. They can be spawned right away. They all have special abilities. Often people use them in the early game to do some initial scouting or to defend against early pushes. There's 8 of them. You start with a couple. We'll talk more about them over time. They all have their little quirks. The current heroes being used right now, I can't remember their name, but they're an archer, and their special attack, which opens up after now 28 seconds for both of them, is a burst of arrow damage that can melt down a lot of pretty sizable units. Also good for destroying a building quickly. Anyway, enough yakking. Let's get into it. So, unfortunately, from my perspective, if you're watching a replay, blue side always wins. So we'll always just talk about what blue side's doing. We'll refer to red side as well, but you know. You're a boy, blue. You're a boy. So he started off, he didn't upgrade any cards. He went straight into building a mana sanctum and then a camp. Building a second camp. From my perspective, and again, this is the lowest of the low in terms of skill. From my perspective, I would start building units right away in almost all circumstances so that you have something to play, especially if your opponent rushes you, and you begin the upgrade to tier 2. This first game is probably going to be a little bit of a shit show. That's cool. We'll go to some of the higher level play right after this. But you know, it's just a nice casual introduction. Blue side, he picked the Viking, which is kind of like a tougher basic tier 1 unit. It's got a little extra damage, a little extra health. And then the archer. Red side, he went with the shielded mouse, which has a shield that absorbs some damage. I also think it's good, like, if there's like a large attack, the shield will expire without damaging the mouse. So it's kind of cool for preventing damage from certain spells. All right, they're engaging. Heroes have been dropped. They both use their special ability. Red side hero is going down. You can see that while you're in these engagements, you have this sphere of influence, which is created by your camps. You can only drop units in your sphere of influence. So how aggressively you place your camps determines how much of the field of battle you can play on. Both sides are dropping things. Goblins are going down. They're the weak unit. I think they're incredible. You can use them for a lot of different things. They're cheap. They can scout. You can drop them down in a pinch to help you shore up some defenses. But after going back and forth with this engagement, it looks like red's mostly getting the better of it. But one of the big crux in this game is trying to figure out, when do you push? When do you pull back? How aggressive should you be? It's really like every game, but particularly like real-time strategy games, it's about resource management. If you have more mana, in general, you will win. And the main way to gain more mana is to trade favorably. These guys probably don't have spells yet, which is fine, but spells, particularly some of the ones you can unlock at tier 1, can be super, super effective at swinging the tide of the battle in your favor if you drop them on a lot of your opponent's little weak units. Those archers, I believe, cost 15 mana. A few of the, I feel, better early spells, the Fire Pillar and the Poison Mist, they cost about 45. So as long as you kill 3 archers within that spell, at least, you get even value. And often they bunch up in huge clusters and you can get tons, hundreds of mana in value. That's what's going to turn the tide of the battle. So moving forward, they've kind of just continued this prolonged engagement in the center. That does pull resources away from them doing things like building more camps or developing their mana sanctums, which would allow them to collect mana faster. But it seems like blue side is kind of getting the better of it. They've upgraded and have been using a lot of the rifleman unit, which is pretty versatile. There are ground units and air units in this game. Some of the air units are quite strong, and pretty much always they have to be contested in some capacity. If the deck that you select doesn't have any anti-air, your opponent will probably pick up on that, and if they have any air units, they'll probably exploit that to beat you. I didn't say it explicitly, but as I'm sure you can imagine, how do you win the game? Matches go about 6 minutes, then they go into a sudden death where both the friendly and the opponent's castle start burning. Castle burning. Whoever castle is destroyed first, they're the loser, other guy's the winner. Bing, bang, boom. Red side, they selected the wolf. Lupus? No, that's a disease. Lepus? The L word that means wolf? We'll look it up afterwards. These are kind of a cool unit, especially earlier on. They have an AoE attack, they have fairly high damage, so they're good for managing and taking out swarms. Red side's still just kind of rocking the shield mouse. Neither side has built a sanctum on the central mana wells. It's a little surprising, but... And we can't see red side's sphere of influence, but you can tell that the blue side, which now is finally doing it, they have enough influence to build over that mana well. Blue also upgraded the Amazon. They only attack buildings. They're the ones with the big orange capes. They're nice for drawing aggro, and they do damage to buildings. You can bait the opponent to attack them instead of your damage dealers, which is always a nice little function. They also upgraded for their 6th card in the deck, the Hammerer, the something Hammerer. They're pretty high damage, single target. They're good for, dealing with stronger units. They can take a good beating, but they are single target, so they go down the swarms pretty quickly. And red side, they also played the Minotaur. That's a tier 3 card. Same thing, high health, high damage, single target. They're vulnerable to swarms, and they're really effective against valuable ground assets. It's official, folks. We in burn-in time. Red side had already taken plenty of damage on their castles, so unless some kind of freaky miracle happens, blue side's going to win this one. Although, again, I'll say it one more time and then try not to keep bringing it up. We know blue side's going to win every time. If the developers decide to switch that out, keep us guessing a little bit, I would love it. All right. So that was wood tier. Let's go and see what they're doing here. I'm in silver 2. Let's see what some of the mid-level gameplay looks like. We got Aravan and Heisenberg. Alright, so Heisenberg started building some units right away. I think actually, I'm pretty sure that the question mark icon at the top left of the second card in their deck, that means that they played a random tier 1 card, I would think. And if you do that, you don't get to choose what the card is, random, but you do get to purchase that card at a discount, which is a nice mana saving feature. Early game mana management is critical. Blue side, he went with a camp and he's doing a sanctum first. Again, in most scenarios, I prefer to upgrade cards immediately. Pretty much always. One of the main reasons is that in the lower tiers up to about this Silver 2 level, a lot of players pick up on the fact that you can do these goblin rushes. Essentially, you don't spend any mana on anything except for goblins, maybe Demon Blood, which is the card that blue side has upgraded for their, or chosen for their second card in the deck, which is a attack speed steroid. But yeah, basically for the Goblin Rush, you build one camp, you wait until you have about 170 mana, and then you just spam goblins and then hit them with the blood when they get to the other side, led in by the hero. If the opponent doesn't have something like a spell or any units already upgraded at the castle, they don't have anything to defend with, it catches them off guard, you win 99% of the time. By about this point in experience, though, most people have picked up on the fact that the Goblin Rush is possible and generally will upgrade some kind of card early on to counter it. It's actually pretty dope. I didn't find out about it until I'd already climbed out of the rank where it was effective, so I kind of missed out on the whole Rush hype train, but yeah, it's okay. Alright, so you can see blue side, he's upgraded to tier 2. Now he's been really aggressive on red side has been really aggressive on as soon as those new cards for tier 2 were upgraded, or tier 2 was unlocked, he started unlocking some of the cards so he could get to tier 3. He's already there. Blue side's still at tier 2. He's getting a little itch. He's feeling like it's time to attack. He used that Demon Blood, that damage steroid. Now, what he did right there, that's something I think you really want to avoid. Poison Mist is this awesome spell. It has a wide radius, does damage over time, and it stays in an area. At level 5, I don't know for how long, but I think at certain levels it can stay there like 9 seconds. It's actually quite a long time. Blue side, Aravan, sent a bunch of troops forward in a group without scouting what the opponent was capable of doing or what they were running into. They all bunched up on the bridge. The first thing that red side did, as they should have, was drop that poison cloud and just smoked everything on the ground. It doesn't affect air units, but that huge push, tons of mana, just evaporated. That's the kind of stuff that you gotta avoid if you're trying to win the game. Red side, they have the goblin helicopter dudes. After this, we'll look up a few names for things. They're great anti-air. They can do some anti-ground. They have this little machine gun, but they're not very good at it, so you don't want to rely on them for that. You use them to counter things like goblins, and they're a tier 2 anti-air unit, which is unique. Alright, blue side, they're dropping tanks, and they also are dropping the dragon, which is one of the kings of the game in terms of power and damage. Again, you want to be careful when you're bunching them up, and the dragons are masterfully countered by the Dragon Slayer, go figure, which is a tier 3 ground unit. It does basic melee damage on the ground, but it is incredible at taking out air units. These are the kind of things you have to think about when selecting units and filling out your deck. Like, right now, on blue side, the best thing he's got for anti-air is either that Sprite, which was his 4th card selected. His 3rd card selected is a damage spell, so that can be used, or the dragons themselves. If red side had a really strong air force, blue wouldn't necessarily be able to counter it too effectively. Again, I'm still learning all this stuff, but I think the dynamic makes sense in principle to most of us, right? Gotta be able to counter the ground, gotta be able to counter the air. Blue side, his push is working out. He's got the tanks going. They do damage at a range. They do have a minimum range, which I didn't realize right away, like I read it, but they can fire up to 8 spaces away, which is incredibly long, and they can't fire under 5 spaces away. So their window is actually pretty small, and if something gets up on them, they're very vulnerable. One of my favorite ways to counter this is I almost always go with goblins in my deck. You can drop some goblins in front of them to draw aggro away from the tanks. It helps out. Another great way to help them stay alive is to use the return function so that you can spawn some other units that go in front while they head towards the back line. But they are really slow, so you need to anticipate this kind of stuff and do it early. Alright, they're continuing to pummel each other. Red side just spawned one of the Dragon Slayers, but again, that's no match for a tank. Blue side, he's spawning some dragons on the left. He's got tanks going. Red's done. They have no economy. They haven't put up any real defense. They don't have any mana. Just like in other real-time strategy games. One of the kind of two most effective ways to swing the battle in your favor is to trade favorably and to attack your opponent's income. In this, mana wells, or sanctums, and camps. Alright, blue side wins. Let's look at a few names. There's all these menus. Over time I might talk about some of this stuff, but it's okay, they got a shop. Most of it seems quite pricey. They got the card menu here. You can see I've got a couple of heroes. You've got all your cards at different tiers, which is great. Okay, Lupine Berserker. That was one of the cards that we were looking at before. That does the AoE damage on the ground. 221. I've got it at level 3. It's pretty good. It's definitely great for staving off all of the tier 1 swarms. What else were we looking at? Harpy. There was a Harpy. Oh, Hammer Warrior. Okay. Couldn't be more straightforward. This is kind of tankier guy that does a lot of damage. He's single target, so again, you want to know what you're going up against. Swarms are really effective at taking it down, but it's really useful for taking out high value assets on the ground. Tier 3, Goblin Tank, Dragon Slayer, Minotaur, all the kind of usual things we were seeing. There's a lot of units that I'm still missing, so one fine day. Anyway, let's go check out one more match. Now it is time for the creme de la creme. Champions, baby. Oh yeah, let's see this guy. So currently, Gotchagasm is number 1, and over the last couple of days, I've been watching some replays. Seems like he's number 1 most of the time. He is up against Berry Kitty. Oh, hero names. I'll learn some hero names and I'll get better at it, but Gotchagasm is using the same archer that we've been seeing in a lot of the matches. It's one of the ones you unlock early, so earlier on people are going to use it a lot. Red side is using, I believe she's called Genie. She's a warrior on the ground. She actually functions fairly similar to the archer, except for she doesn't have range, but her special ability increases her movement and attack speed. So she's good for being on the front line, drawing some aggro, and melting some high value assets. Also scouting. As I'm sure you may have noticed by now, there are different maps in the game, which actually makes it pretty dynamic. This one is kind of nuts because there's these 2 side lanes that aren't wide enough to build in, so it's very hard to have vision of the lanes. It sets up some pretty brutal sneak attacks if you're not paying attention. So one of my favorite ways of hedging against this is grabbing goblins, because they're the best, and periodically throwing one up each lane so I can scout out and see what the enemy is doing. Red side's pushing into blue side with that leader. The spell that he's cast was Frost something, but just like it sounds like, freezes the enemy for a short period of time. Gotchagasm, he's dropping some goblins. He's got his hero going. His hero's getting frozen. So one of the things you saw there is that if someone casts a spell on you, there's pretty much always a delay. If you can, pop return and get your guys out of the area of effect for the spell. That's a really great way to make your opponent waste some of the value they would have gotten out of the spell. And spells are expensive and have cooldowns. I think another really effective thing to be thinking about is don't play all of your units, all of your mana in a big cluster all at once. Play a little bit, see if you can bait out a spell, and once your opponent doesn't have any more spells, then you slam all your units on the board because you know they're all not going to get wiped out by some huge spell and your opponent's not going to get tons of value. All right. Sending some sneaky riflemen up the right lane. Got some gobos in the middle. Heroes getting frozen. That freeze doesn't do any damage itself, but it sets up plenty. Top side, second card that was selected by Berry Kitty is a Mouse Bomber, which is a suicide unit. It actually does significant damage. I haven't used it that much, so I can't remember how much it costs. Because it's a unit that suicides, you need to think about what's the value you're getting. If you throw out a bunch of those, then your opponent baits them with some cheap goblins, you're just going to be throwing away value. So, pick your battles and all that. Red side's getting really aggressive with the camps. That allows them to place units much further on the blue side. Got that Lupine Wolf going. Got that Rifleman. But blue side, bam, you got Griffin Riders. Griffin Riders are an air unit that only attacks ground. They have mid-level health, fairly high health, although kind of low for a tier 3. Their main thing is that they have plenty of range, but they do not attack anti-air. So dragons are an awesome counter for them. Any air unit really is a great counter for them. And Dragon Slayers naturally work well against them as well. When you scout your opponent and engage them, there's also a spell that allows you to remove some Fog of War and check out your opponent's base, within a certain radius. Scouting your opponent reveals information about what cards they've selected. You want to periodically be making contact with your opponent to see what they're building, because sometimes you're going to select certain cards in the deck because it's the strategy you want. Sometimes you're going to select certain cards because you're specifically countering your opponent's strengths. And I find that usually end up doing like a nice balance between the two. I primarily have a strat that has a build path and I don't deviate from it too much. But occasionally, if the opponent gives me something like they don't have any air units, and I often would build a Dragon Slayer, I'm going to build something else so I can buff up my ground attack. For example. The game's really fun. It's dynamic. Things happen in real time, right? There's a lot of back and forth. You can be way ahead, and spells are game changers. If you bunch your guys in effectively, if you don't notice that your opponent is playing a bunch of cards to counter you, like for example, that spell that Red Side's casting, just knocked out a hero and a couple of griffins. If that got a few more, that could have shut down that whole push. So it's just things to notice. I love what's happening with the gobos. I think it's nice to shoot them around different parts of the map. They draw a lot of aggro. Griffins are just wiping out everything. Just having a ball. And look at that range. They're one of the longest range units in the game that's not a tower or a tank. I think they are the longest range beyond towers and tanks. And towers are a whole nother kettle of fish. They do consume some of your capacity. They're generally a defensive thing because you can't, really place them aggressively unless you did some crazy nuts advancing with the camps. But there is one card which is quite controversial right now, and we'll talk about real quick before we wrap things up, and that is the Tower of Doom. How foreboding is that, right? All right, I don't have it yet, but here it is. The Tower of Doom. So this bad boy takes forever to build. I think it's 3 minutes? It's more than 2. I think it's 3 minutes. And it costs, 180 seconds. There we go. And it costs 100 mana to build. Once you hit tier 3, you can select this guy and you can build it. It's going to eat up one of your tier 3 slots. So if you do go this route, you're only going to be able to choose one other tier 3 unit, which is important to think about because they're generally considered the best units in the game, or at least strongest. The Tower of Doom, though, once it completes building, will shoot out shots that will nuke everything on the map. And it kind of attacks what's closest to it first and then works its way to your opponent's castle. It can one-shot buildings, it can one-shot, I think, any unit. And yeah, it's just this fire-spitting Mordor of doom. If you get it out and you survive long enough for it to start doing damage, which isn't always a guarantee, it generally is a guaranteed win. Another reason why you gotta scout in this game is you gotta know if your opponent's building one of these, because if they do, you know that they've spent significant mana on it, and you gotta get there and kill them or kill it before it gets to fire, because if that thing starts up, you're pretty much done. Some things to think about. Well, anyway, this has been lovely. I hope you enjoyed it. I like this kind of content, and there's not a lot for it for this game yet, so I was like, heck, I'll just make some. Like the video if you like the video. Subscribe, because there will be more. And leave me a comment, because you never really know with these things, but I suspect a lot of people are getting bored of Clash Royale, and probably a lot of them are going to jump ship and get onto this game. It's polished, it looks great, they're advertising it well. They just released it globally a week ago, so the player count is still smaller, but I think they've already hit 2 million downloads, so that's nothing to scoff at. Get on the train, it's leaving the station. Alright, y'all. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.